YouTube stream. There's a 45-second delay though. So.
Okay.
Okay, and we're back. So I have the honor of introducing two wonderful people for the next session. I'm going to introduce both of them now, and Father Pavel will speak first, and then Sister Margaret will speak second. Father Pavel Tarashevich is an expert in Thomistic personalism. Currently, he is working on translating into English the Universal Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which was produced by the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin and friends, as he told me. I also want to talk about Sister Margaret Obravik, who has been a daughter of St. Paul for 38 years. Her Twitter profile describes her as a Catholic evangelizer, an intercessor, a writer, and a speaker, telling the Pauline story and preparing laity for mission in a world ruled by the media. So this should be a great session. Please give a warm welcome to both.
Thank you very much for the splendid introduction. Sister Margaret, are you ready? Okay. Before I start to speak about the new evangelization, please let me raise a question which logically needs to be answered first, which is, what is evangelization? According to the Catechism of the Roman Catholic Church, the evangelization consists in proclaiming Jesus Christ by words and by the testimony of life. It is noteworthy that the Catechism uses the verb proclaim, which values the action of those who are to bear witness, and does not favor the effectiveness of their action by imposing on them a duty of converting people to Christianity. If you ask me the reason why this is so, I would say that the Church, who advocates the liberty of religion, does not believe in converting one another, but rather in making personal decisions. This is a person who eventually converts himself to Christianity by freely choosing to believe in Christ. Still, the role of those who evangelize is crucial, since it consists in encouraging people to ask themselves a Hamlet-like question: to be a Christian. The evangelization then charges the Church, and namely us Christians, to preach and witness to our faith in whatever circumstances we find ourselves and through whatever vocation the Lord has given us in order to promote our faith among other people. What is vital to capitalize here is that evangelizing all people in that way constitutes and has always constituted the essential mission of the Church since her very beginning. If the evangelization preserves the identity of the Church, then speaking about a new evangelization looks like introducing a new church, a new gospel, a new Christ. Could it be true? Of course not. The new evangelization does not mean changing the gospel, but rather discerning new circumstances under which the old gospel is preached these days. Throughout her 2,000-year history, the Church has understood that we will always encounter something new about the human condition, and therefore something new in how the Church will respond. Generally speaking, the new evangelization is the new way the Church adopts to respond to challenges posed by the situation in which the Church finds herself in the contemporary world. Besides this general interpretation, can we find any more precise elucidation of the new evangelization in the documents of the Church? According to Father James Banner, a former president of the Pontifical College Josephinum, the new evangelization is a developing concept whose history started in Latin America, evolved during the pontificate of Saint Pope John Paul II, and reached its culmination in our time. For the first time, it was used in 1968 by the Latin American bishops in their message to the people of Latin America to address how the gospel can reach both the elite and the poor in equal manner and with intense favor. The political and social conditions of Latin America resulted in a discernment that the church must respond to this new situation with a new evangelization methods that would bring the gospel of Christ to all people, no matter their condition in life. Today, in turn, the new evangelization is identified with two methods applied by the church to complete her mission, namely inculturalization and catechesis. Few words about the inculturalization. Because people cannot live without culture, the mission of the church is to evangelize them by means of culture. To achieve this, the new evangelization promotes an authentic humanism that can only be found in Jesus Christ. Strictly speaking, in the imitation of Christ, which leads to achieve virtues prescribed by the human nature created by God. To support this claim, let me quote two sources. First, the Second Vatican Council, which clearly states in Gaudium et Spes number 59 that culture flows from humanity's rational and social nature. Hence, man needs to be evangelized so that culture does not become poisoned, destroying what God intends for us. Secondly, St. John Paul II, who emphasized that human beings are both child and parent of the culture, and thus responsible for what they receive from the culture and how they shape it. Shortly speaking, culture needs to give expression to faith. The goal of the new evangelization, then, is to bridge the human desire to possess internal life and the need of cultivating human nature. One cannot fully express itself without the other. Faith that has no connection to culture can easily lead to superstition. A culture that is not shaped by faith sooner or later leads to the subjugation of man to ideology. Pope John Paul II, in his address to the International Council for the Catechesis in 1992, stated that the inherent missionary nature of the church means testifying essentially to the fact that the task of inculturation as the integral dissemination of the gospel and its consequent translation into thought and life continues today and represents the heart, the means, and the goal of the new evangelization. Another method of the new evangelization is catechesis. It was confirmed by John Paul, who wrote in one of his exhortations, I quote, "The new evangelization means that faith cannot be taken for granted, but must be explicitly proposed in all its breadth and richness. This is the principal objective of catechesis, which by its very nature is an essential aspect of a new evangelization." Is there any association between catechesis and inculturalization? Yes, there is. The more Catholics are intimately involved with their faith and know their faith and their relationship with Jesus Christ, the more believers are able to bring their witness and words into culture. The more culture itself becomes shaped. The passivity of Catholics in the world, resulting from historical and sociological conditions, has left generations of Catholics with the notion that what we learn and believe in catechesis is meant for our own personal edification rather than for the purpose of an evangelization. The disconnect between what the believer knows about the faith and how to live this faith threatens the credibility of many churches, convictions, especially those on moral issues related to human sexuality, medical ethics, and marriage. Now the second chapter of my paper, which will discuss John Paul II's understanding of the new evangelization. But instead of delivering a survey of how the notion evolved and developed in his pontificate, I'm going to concentrate my reflection on his first usage of the term in order to better understand the meaning of the adjective new, which precedes evangelization. St. John Paul II first used the term new evangelization in his homily delivered during his visit to Poland in 1979. He said that from the cross of Nowa Huta began the new evangelization, the evangelization of the second millennium. What is Nowa Huta, and about what a cross did he speak? Nowa Huta, literally the new steelworks, is a district of Krakow, which was originally constructed as a new city following the Second World War. At the heart of the city stood the Lenin Steelworks, a symbol of the industrial might of the Soviet Union. The decision to construct Nowa Huta, neighboring to the ancient city of Krakow, was a deliberate strategy on the part of the communist authorities. For centuries, Krakow has been the intellectual and cultural center of Poland, due largely to the presence of the 600-year-old Jagiellonian University. The huge steel mill was intended to transform this academic city into a prototypical city of workers, an embodiment of communist ideology. Certainly, Nowa Huta was a very comfortable place to live in those days. There was a cinema, theater, as well as sports clubs, libraries, schools. However, one structure was conspicuously absent from the urban plan: a church. Despite the fact that the majority of the population consisted of Catholics, peasants from the surrounding villages, it was designed to be the first communist city without God. For many years, residents of Nowa Huta tried to get permission to build the church for which they longed. In 1956, following the crisis of the Red Star regime in Poland, the communist authorities finally gave permission to build a place of worship in the city square. Citizens immediately placed a large wooden cross there, and the square became a center of the city's religious life. Regular prayers, as well as occasional masses, were organized near the cross. A church, however, was not built. The citizens struggled for years for obtaining construction permits until the authorities finally decided that a school would be built in the city square instead. Moreover, it was ordered that the cross be removed. On a spring day in 1960, a corps of workers guarded by armed officers arrived early in the morning to tear down the Nowa Huta cross. A group of women saw what was happening and immediately sparked a protest. They were joined by a shift of the steel mill, which was let out at the very moment. In a spontaneous act of civil disobedience, about 5,000 workers and citizens suddenly gathered in the square. After several hours, what began as a non-violent protest devolved into street fight against the government military forces. Lasting 4 days, the defense of the cross led to bloody repression. A dozen people were killed and hundreds were injured. More than 500 demonstrators were arrested. 87 received prison sentences and many more lost their jobs. The witness of the protest, though, was not in vain, for the cross remained standing over Nowa Huta, over the city without God. In the defense of the cross in Nowa Huta, a young auxiliary bishop named Karol Wojtyła played an important role. After the protests in the city square, he protected victims of communist repression and organized open-air midnight masses under the cross on Christmas Eve. In 1965, already as an Archbishop of Krakow, Wojtyła was presented with a stone from the tomb of St. Peter by the Pope Paul VI, who said to him, "Take this stone back to Poland. May the Church of Nowa Huta be built on it." Thanks to the undying perseverance of the city's Catholics, the first church in Nowa Huta was finally built in 1977. During his first apostolic journey to his homeland in 1979, the communist authorities did not permit John Paul II to celebrate Mass by the cross of Nowa Huta. Despite that fact, he made a great use of it by perpetuating it as a symbol of a new evangelization. In fact, in his homily, he twice repeated those words: "From the cross of Nowa Huta began the new evangelization, the evangelization of the second millennium, namely the second millennium of the Christianity in Poland." It seems that for John Paul II, the events of Nowa Huta were emblematic of the Church's task of reintroducing the gospel in Western societies, especially those that have lost a sense of God, to progressive secularization. As it was in Poland more than 5 decades ago, the cross today is also, in a sense, being removed from politics, academia, culture, family life, and the media, as the Christian faith becomes increasingly marginalized. The new evangelization, the great springtime for Christianity, therefore, depends on our own reaction to the problems of the contemporary world. It depends on our willingness to start a personal defense of the cross in the place where we live. Speaking of us, I especially mean the lay members of the Church. To fuel the new evangelization, the commitment of nuns or priests is not enough. The effect of the whole hierarchy and structure of the Church is too less. The new evangelization seems to be a new policy of the Church, who seeks to be not a nanny-state for her citizens, but rather a family of her enterprising children who can live religious life both in their homes and everywhere else. In the last part of my paper, I'm going to concentrate on the linkage between the new evangelization and the Western civilization. I must confess that it is my serious concern, because today evangelization is frequently associated with the idea of de-Hellenization or de-Westernization of the Church. In other words, there is a strong voice in the Church which promotes the equality of civilizations and their right to adopt Christian faith in their own way. Such an idea evidently undermines the identity of the Church, which so far has been based on the Western civilization. In my opinion, if the whole Church remained faithful to her old Western civilization, now the new evangelization would not be necessary. The old evangelization would be sufficient. The new evangelization then seems to aim not only at promoting the Christian faith, but also, and I would say first of all, at recovering a civilizational basis common to the whole Church. Let me explain my position. The importance of the Western tradition in the Church cannot be overestimated. The achievements of the Western civilization are the basis on which the universal identity of the Church is built. Without the Western civilization, the Church would not be a community based on the dogmas of their faith and patterns of her conduct. The test of the civilizational identity of the Church is her relationship to human nature. She sees humanity as a community that takes part in the same nature, the nature which is the essential justification for both the goal and means of human development. Now, the presence of Western civilization in the transmission of faith often comes to be blamed for being an authorized attempt to westernize the universal Church. The blamers, motivated by the concern for the salvation of all people inhabiting the earth, suggests to avoid promoting the civilizational achievements of Western Christianity wherever the Christian faith could be identified with the religion of Europe, the West, professed by white people, and thus foreign to the representatives of other continents, races, cultures. According to them, the civilization of the Western Christianity is not universal. It is a creation of the West, and in the West it should remain. Supporters of the Hellenized Christianity, as the Pope Benedict XVI called them in his famous Regensburg lecture, enthusiastically want all the other civilizations to also have the right to develop their own types of Christian cultures. The fact is that there are many civilizations that function in the world and express themselves through appropriate types of cultures. With one civilization, the representatives of different cultures share the common method of organizing social life, and thus, at the same time, the common view of what is good, true, beautiful, and holy. Is there any common view which can unite the different cultures and come from different civilizations? According to the advocates of the Hellenized Christianity, such an inter-civilizational link can be provided just by the Hellenized Christianity. The idea of Christianity as a community uniting all cultures, regardless of their civilizational roots, seems to be very attractive due to the ultimate goal of humanity. However, depriving Western civilization of universal status in the universal church has far-reaching consequences in terms of the identity of the church. The sole source of her identity once again becomes religious faith, just as it was at the beginning of Christianity. But this is not the same kind of faith. 2,000 years ago, the Christian faith sought to establish a universal Christian culture. Today, the Christian faith seems to take on a form which deliberately refuses to discover and disseminate universal cultural patterns out of fear of violating the peculiarities of local cultures immersed in different types of civilization. Consequently, the Christian faith becomes a faith lived here and now, which seeks justification in terms known to a given community only from their personal experience. It becomes evident that the only common element which identifies the church divided by different civilization is the requirement to follow Christ and his teachings according to a person's own capabilities, meaning based on one's own cultural experience. Standard is, in turn, the principle of tolerance for cultural pluralism, which, according to proponents of this position, indicates not so much a lack of unity, but rather points to the cultural richness of the community of believers, which tends to the same eschatological purpose through the meanders of different civilizations. Without reference, however, to a civilization common to all Christians, can we speak of Christian identity in a temporal dimension of life? It seems impossible. This is so because the comprehensive identity assumes the reference to culture, and through culture to civilization. For Christian identification, the cultural affiliation of a man is as important as his religious relationship with Jesus Christ. We cannot speak about the identity of a man without reference to his specific culture. A man becomes a Christian in a popular ecclesial community, in a particular ecclesial community, in a particular country, among particular folk, and through patterns, in short, within the context of a given culture. A Christian's identity outside of culture cannot exist, as there cannot exist a way of life without a culture through which his religious faith can manifest. In other words, there is no Christian identity outside of culture. because the Christian identity is nothing but a testimony of one's life with God. Now, if individuals are identified by culture, what is that which identifies cultures? That is civilization. In the case of Western Christianity, this is the Latin civilization, personalistic civilization, which historically owes its existence to educational activities of the Latin Church. It is a personalistic civilization which understands every human being as the subject and at the same time the goal of social life, where the good of an individual is the measure and criterion for undertaken activities. The Latin civilization aims at the comprehensive development of the human person and therefore includes individual freedom and responsibility. The affirmation of human freedom in Latin civilization can be illustrated by a simple fact that no one but a person can bear responsibility for the implementation and achievement of the ultimate goal of a person's life. Personalism demands all the structures of social life, including the state, respect individuals, whereas non-personalistic civilization appreciate the preponderance of society over individuals. To summarize, the identity of the church needs to be based on two pillars, the religious pillar and the civilizational pillar. The religious pillar, which covers authentic faith in Jesus Christ, is a necessary factor, but not sufficient in itself. A religious faith can identify man in full only when it is professed, when it is confirmed by testimony. A necessary complement to the religious element of Christian identity is thus the civilizational pillar, which represents the principles of professing Christian faith, of wedding what to believe with how to believe. The new evangelization then, to which all the Catholics are invited and encouraged to engage, gives us the assignment to recover or build anew a civilization which will unify and identify all the Christian cultures. St. John Paul II has already begun to carry out this assignment for us by promoting the civilization of love, which is the only civilization fitting to the dignity of human person. Now he needs us to continue his excellent work. Thank you very much.
Questions now or questions at the end? I would think so now. All right, let's take a few questions now. I'll allow Father to field his own.
I'm happy that Jim Marousas wasn't here to hear you talk about the foundation being Latin rather than Greek civilization. But I know that Pope Benedict talks about in his Regensburg and Catholic University address, I think also, about the Hellenization, the Hellenic origin of which you're incorporating into Latin civilization. And he especially, I want to know whether you would agree with this, because the way I interpret it, he makes reference to the Greek logos having preceded in the beginnings of Christianity, being contained in the Septuagint version of the Jewish scriptures, so that there's this inclusion of Greek philosophical reason into the culture with which the Christ message becomes wedded to develop the early church, which makes this kind of philosophical logos an essential part of the revelation. And if that's the case, then a new substance, in a way, has come into being, which is not strictly speaking Greek, and not strictly speaking what has come from the Middle East, the Revelation, but a new kind of culture, which cannot eradicate from its roots that Greek philosophical sense realism. If that's the case, then if we get that wrong, if we try to replace that Greek philosophical vision with anything else, the culture that we will get will not be representative of Catholic culture. Would you agree with that? Or am I missing? Am I reading into him?
I'm going to add something because why I do apply these two terms in different sense, civilization and culture, because many of us, and myself, I use them differently. It's not that I keep especially my interest with one of them, but in this paper, these two should be recognized as different, because we have to admit that we live in a multicultural society, okay? And not to demolish what exists. My proposal is to locate all the culture which can identify us on the same foundation, basis, which is civilization, okay? So civilization as such is invisible, can become visible through culture, which adopts rules which are contained in civilization. So it is new. It is not new. It is rather Samuel Huntington's approach to what civilization is. Okay, he organizes the order, global order, using this notion to show that we have different Christian cultures, for example, but we are united within one civilization, Christian civilization.
Right.
And I would like to appeal to this meaning of the civilization.
Right. Now, what I'm asking, so basically you have a metaphysical foundation, and what I'm asking is whether an essential element of that metaphysical, that civilizational foundation principle is an understanding of a philosophical content that you cannot eradicate. So if you try to replace, there's underlying it a Greek understanding of the person as a rational being in touch with reality. It's not fully developed with the Greeks. But so if you attempted to eliminate that, eradicate it, extricate it from Christianity, basically, there's no way you can have this global.
I agree entirely with this. I would add that, for example, it is not that something is true because it is Catholic or Christian. It is Christian because it is true. Okay, so this is how it works. So all principles should be universal, should be adequate to reality. That is why this is the strength. I would say that it would be a strength of Christian civilization if it was really founded on universal principles, not only given for us believers, but universal. It means that acceptable by everybody. And of course, it is very philosophical. I would say that what we need now, of course, new evangelization is basic for us, but new philosophization of the globe is necessary.
Right. So if you try to take out that classical understanding of philosophy, if you're wrong about it, then you can't possibly be right about Christianity. If you try to impose Hegelianism into it, or Marxism, or any of this, since it's really rooted in this concept of the human person, which is there before the beginnings of Christianity,
And it was began by John Paul II. So we know his doctrine about the civilization of life, civilization of love. So I think what now is needed is to develop his work, his seeds scattered all over. So, yes.
Yeah, I wonder if you've seen the passage in Fides et Ratio. I think it's maybe like 76. He talks about, I've unstintingly called for a new evangelization, and now I call philosophers. It's very personal to play a fundamental role in the new evangelization. And so I still ask, what is the philosophy of the new evangelization? Now, before we just answer that and say, well, we're already doing that. Because that's what a lot of people do with the new evangelization. Say, oh, well, he's just talking about what we do, and we have readers at church now, so we're participating in new evangelization. And they just call what they're doing a new evangelization. But it seems to me like to really listen to that call seriously, we have to really, well, what new things do we have to do? Because he talks about philosophers have to do new things.
Very easy answer. According to John Paul, what is common for us all is making decisions. How can we make decisions without philosophy? So philosophy is a natural feature of man. We are good philosophers or bad philosophers, but we must philosophize. It is not the discipline of university. No, it is the task of education. So I would answer it like this: because of making decisions, we have to philosophize. We have to distinguish true from wrong.
So that they need to think more philosophically in their decision making and promote that through media. Promote philosophy through media, mystic Aristotelian philosophy, or is there a possibility of reviving the Logos?
Even implicitly, it is not necessary to promote the notion of philosophy. Yes, because we had many presentations here which do not use such words like philosophy, but they do this.
But it's also that invitation is also in the context of faith and reason.
Yeah.
In a world that, unlike the one that the Protestant Church left to us, in which there was a harmony at that point between science, knowledge at that time, and faith, today actually we lost it. So in a sense, we need to recover a vision of the world in which our faith and science and knowledge of people in this time are in harmony. And clearly, Fides et Ratio is a document that to me is calling everybody to approach this issue. We have to evangelize the world and try to paint this connection. So I think this is the main call for philosophers. So.
Thank you very much.
All right, sister, it's all you.
I can't see anybody except Dr. Redpath, which is nice.
Oh, wait a minute, I can fix that.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Now you can see everybody else.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hello.
Why does this feel like bumper room?
You're not far off. We felt that way for several days.
I'm having a hard time hearing the comments and questions from the group. So if you have anything that you would like to say afterwards, please come up, because the audio just isn't quite where it needs to be on Skype. On the YouTube channel, it's better.
Okay.
When I told one of our senior sisters this morning that the topic of my talk was going to be crossing the threshold of hope into the media culture, she quipped, "May we not trip." And I said, "Oh my dear, from your mouth to God's ear." And it's there's a lot of wisdom in that, but we'll get to that later. My main resource for this presentation is Crossing the Threshold of Hope by John Paul II. No surprise there. Unless I indicate otherwise, whenever I quote from him, I am referring to this book. Within the culture of communication, there exists a media culture. That is, the nature and influence of the human and technological mediation of ideas, values, information, stories, rituals, and even economics in the very accessibility of technology. The media have self-propagated in a plethora of communications tools that are constantly evolving. On the one hand, they reinforce the relational dynamic at the heart of culture, especially in their social networking form, generating or supporting other cultures in unprecedented ways. On the other hand, they can devastate culture through their symbiotic relationship with consumerism and the will to power, which constitutes some of the principal dynamics at the root of modern disbelief. The task of the new evangelization with respect to this phenomenon is to build a culture of communication enlightened by faith. How does John Paul II regard modern unbelief? While threshold is not a comprehensive treatment of his thought, it does offer enough of an insight into how informed faith can change the course of a history without God. After situating atheism and faith within a historical context, examining both of them in relation to the development of philosophy and theology, John Paul reflects on his contemporaries' struggle for faith. He describes the characteristics of their inner struggle in the face of evil and nihilism to confer meaning on life consonant with the totality of revealed truth about God and the human person, and to make their individual and societal existence consistent with that meaning. He comments, "One sees clearly that the response to the question, does God exist, is not only an issue that touches the intellect. Questioning God's existence is intimately united with the purpose of human existence. Not only is it a question of the intellect, it is also a question of the will, even a question of the human heart." It could be argued that Wojtyła's understanding of atheism was forged during the immediate aftermath of World War II in the crucible of Marxist dialectical materialism, and has been supplanted by the challenge of a new reality, a new atheism, the bitter fruit in part of 9/11. This reality is characterized by the insecurity of a multipolar geopolitical economy, disgust at the wars of religion, and the deference afforded to the magisterium of science in search for the origins, meaning, and purpose of human existence apart from God. Let us look at 3 real atheists of our times, people whose paths I have crossed, to discover any relevance to this perspective, to his perspective rather. Atheist number 1. On a flight from Toronto to Calgary in 1997, I sat next to an engineer from Poland, living at that time in Ontario. He, his wife, who was also an engineer, and their 17-year-old son were atheists. For 3 hours and some, at his initiative, we conversed about the merits and risks of belief and unbelief, about Poland and culture. Eventually it came out that although the church never betrayed us, as he put it, it kept people from advancing economically and politically, no doubt to keep them away from the Communist Party. I urged him, to be Polish is to be a person of faith. It's who you are, historically and culturally. You want to advance? Go ahead, but not at the cost of who you are. We actually ended up by praying together as we taxied into Calgary. Only God knows where that journey will really end up. Atheist number 2. The following year, I was on a flight from Montreal to Toronto, and a young Chinese woman next to me confided that she had been raised an atheist in mainland China, then immigrated to Canada and got her degree in mathematics 5 years previously. On campus, she was browbeaten as a sinner by proselytizers. Even so, the God question never left her, so she pressed me about God's existence. After I affirmed her intrinsic worth as a human being, I appealed to the Thomistic proof from causality. She countered, but that doesn't prove God's existence. I agreed, explaining that the proofs demonstrate that faith is not contrary to reason. What she next said pierced my heart like a knife. If only someone had talked to me like this 5 years ago, I would be a Christian today. Atheist number 3. Teresa was raised in a very devout Catholic family. Her father was a professor who led an evangelization program at a Catholic university. Her first doubts about God's existence came when she was 5. Later, church politics pressured her father to leave the church's employ. The resulting scandalous behavior of some people of cloth brought intense suffering to her family and soured Teresa to religion and faith itself. She describes her definitive break with God one day when she was 14. I could not understand how a loving, all-powerful God could allow my family to suffer like this. I reasoned that if God did exist, he might as well not exist to me. The moment that thought crossed my mind, I claimed it as my own, and in that instant, I became an atheist. I disowned God. Through a long, circuitous journey, she found her way back to the church, and in 2010, into the Daughters of St. Paul. We just published a book by Sister Teresa Aletheia, Aletheia meaning truth in Greek. The Prodigal You Love, inviting loved ones back to the church. Yes, Margie and John will have it on sale afterwards.
He's selling books with his mom.
I should say for sale, not on sale. As you undoubtedly know, some secular humanists, like Tom Flynn, contend that there really is no new atheism, only new packaging and a new marketing through media. Other atheists, like Victor J. Stenger, disagree. Appealing to science, the new atheists condemn not just belief in God, but respect for such belief. In this crusade against faith, he writes, the real war is between rationalism and superstition. Imperative because of religion's public nature and adverse effect on society. Robert, do we have a slide?
Oh, wait.
Do we have a slide?
Which slide?
I don't know.
Nobody gave me a PowerPoint.
Not a PowerPoint, it was just like, okay. Anyway, I can just tell you very quickly. The American Atheists, .org. American Atheists have started, I believe it was in 2011, 2012, started putting billboards in Times Square at Christmas time. The one in 2012 shows Santa Claus at the top and the crucified Christ underneath. And at the top it says, dump the myth. No, it says, keep the Mary, and under the crucified Christ, dump the myth. They're very aggressive and now have gone nationwide and sometimes on, you see them on buses and on highways. Some of you may have seen them as well. I don't want to discount the influence of science on atheism, but in many ways, it's more of the same. It's just gotten mean. Mean and popular. According to a study conducted by the Pew Research Center in 2014, Americans who are religiously unaffiliated, describing themselves as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, nuns, N-O-N-E-S, nuns, accounted for 22.8% of the population, up from 16.1% 7 years earlier. It marks the highest growth rate of any group in the study. Not surprisingly, a full 34 to 36% of millennials, ages 18 to 33, were thus unaffiliated. More problematic, perhaps, are the roots of atheism, some of which we saw in the faces we just examined. There, people eschewed faith and religion because of their experiences or desires. Sister Teresa Aletheia explains it this way. The roots of my atheism did not lie in a logical refutation of the existence of God. That would come later. Rather than reasoning God's existence away, I simply denied it. An attempt to stifle the voice of God, says John Paul, has nothing to offer except the things of this world. And sometimes such an offer brings with it destruction of cosmic proportions. If that description fit the ideologies of his day, it most certainly reflects the corrosive influences within culture and ours, especially the deformative power of consumerism on technology and on all the ways that technology affects life. In one of its earlier stages, the cancer of consumerism, to use Pope Francis's metaphor, manifested itself 60 years ago in this excerpt from a proposal for prosperity by retail analyst Victor Lebeau in the Journal of Retailing. Annie Leonard made it famous in The Story of Stuff. Quote, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption. The measure of social status, of social acceptance, of prestige is now to be found in our consumptive patterns, the very meaning and significance of our lives today expressed in consumptive terms. Commodities and services must be offered to the consumer with a special urgency. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing pace. We need to have people eat, drink, dress, ride, live with ever more complicated and therefore constantly more expensive consumption." End quote. This cancer has metastasized over the years and is now taking its toll on science, arts and the media, political structures, and even faith communities. It inverts priorities of individuals and families, substituting choice for truth, desires for needs, the immediate and ephemeral for the eternal, the commodity for the person, and what columnist David Brooks calls resume virtues in place of true character. It is in this light that we listen to John Paul's response of faith. He writes, "I think that it is wrong to maintain that St. Thomas's position stands up only in the realm of the rational. One must, it is true, applaud Etienne Gilson when he agrees with St. Thomas that the intellect is the most marvelous of God's creations. But that does not mean that we must give in to a unilateral rationalism. St. Thomas celebrates all the richness and complexity of each created being, and especially of the human being. John Paul roots human knowledge in sensory knowledge, then moves quickly to the transempirical, affirming the validity of extrasensory truths. In addition, far from relegating these to the realm of theology, he recognizes in them a philosophical basis. This is a key element in how John Paul envisioned the new evangelization. He says, "We are witnesses of a symptomatic return to metaphysics through an integral anthropology, one that passes not so much through being and existence as through people and their meeting each other, through the I and the thou, a coexistence." In the face of agnostic demands that God reveal himself on our terms, he observes that the history of salvation is also the history of man's continual judgment of God. John Paul lays the blame for agnosticism at the feet of René Descartes, who split thought from existence and identified existence with reason itself. "I am who am" cannot be reduced to "I think, therefore I am." Absolute mystery is not subject to dissection and analysis, no matter what Victor Stenger thinks. Moreover, John Paul says that what God reveals is not for our control, but for communion, and through it, for adoration and our salvation. In the words of English mystic Evelyn Underhill, "If God were small enough to be understood, he would not be big enough to be worshipped." In his response to the question, what is the use of believing? John Paul adds a pragmatic consideration to his metaphysical anthropological synthesis. He draws from the words of Vatican II to state that the essential usefulness of faith consists in the fact that through faith, man achieves the good of his rational nature. In this way, communion is based on the whole truth about the human person, rather than on a subjective determination of what is right and good. The intended demographic of the new evangelization is whole peoples who were once evangelized but who have either rejected Christianity's Greco-Roman patrimony as outmoded and restrictive, or have traded Christian culture for superficial consumerism. What makes this evangelization new? I mentioned 6 elements here. First, from the outset, Christian mission, like its theology, has been incarnational, earthy, communicated in contemporary terms, and formative of culture. The word with skin on. If we look at a small portion of history, the past 100 years or so, we see numerous icons of new evangelization, people who have incarnated the word in their own lives and ministries in a remarkable way. Here are a few. The thousands of U.S. women religious who devised new ministries to meet new needs of the pioneer, the immigrant, and the child laborer, profoundly shaping the entire nation. Don Bosco and his Salesians who dared to cross into Turin's dark side, entering taverns and workplaces to entice young ruffians to join other boys at the oratory. European missionaries to Asia who at the turn of the last century propagated the gospel by new means and fostered native vocations, even when this alienated Europe's bishops. Alcoholics Anonymous. In 1990, Life magazine listed co-founder Bill Wilson as one of the most influential people of the 20th century. Jacques and Raisa Maritain, Mother Teresa, Brother Roger of Taizé, Oscar Romero, the list goes on. To be new, this incarnational aspect will have to address new situations in radically new ways. Second, it is increasingly lay-inspired, involved, and led, as Father Pavel just mentioned. Preceded by the rise of anti-clerical Enlightenment thinkers and statesmen, the French Revolution and its aftermath meant death and expulsion for clergy and religious all across Europe, the elimination of legal recognition for hundreds of religious communities, together with the confiscation of their goods. Throughout the 19th century and into the 20th, an unintended side effect of this systemic greed was an unprecedented groundswell of the laity in support of the very church whose influence the secular agenda had tried to ban from the public sphere. Individuals, organizations, and movements on both sides of the Atlantic made notable contributions to a burgeoning lay Catholic sense of church, history, and social activism. To garner support for their position, these laity did not hesitate to use the press, the same means used by their opponents. Enter Blessed James Alberione, founder of the Pauline family, with its 10 branches of laity, clergy, and religious. From Opus Dei to communion and liberation, modern lay movements point to a theological shift, part of Vatican II's legacy, namely an evangelization derived from baptism rather than from the ministerial priesthood as the basis for the Christian's right and responsibility to share the gospel of Christ. Much needed is the integration of Christian values into social, academic, political, and economic sectors that these spiritualities foster. Third, earlier we heard John Paul propose an anthropology that passes through people and their meeting each other. The new evangelization is therefore relational, first with God in Christ, then with each other. In his first encyclical, Benedict XVI underscored this relational aspect of faith. Quote, being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. Since God has first loved us, love is no longer a mere command, it is the response to the gift of love with which God draws near to us, end quote. To be authentic, this love in God must be incarnated in love for neighbor, concretely in empathy. Whoever does not love a brother or sister whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. 1 John. Last year, in this very gathering, we tussled with an assertion that the purpose of economics is to increase wealth. Remember? For whom? According to what criteria? And at what cost? John Paul connects a warning against triumphalism vis-a-vis communism with a warning to the West regarding his very prevailing notion about economics, exacerbated by the media. He writes, "How else can we explain the increasing gap between the rich North and the ever poorer South? Who is responsible for this? Man is responsible. Responsibility lies with the struggle against God, the systematic elimination of all that is Christian." End quote. Do we really need to add that little hinders the church's evangelizing effort more than Christians exploiting other human beings? In his latest encyclical, Laudato Si', Pope Francis writes, "The principle of the maximization of profits, frequently isolated from other considerations, reflects a misunderstanding of the very concept of the economy. Only when the economic and social costs of using up shared environmental resources are recognized with transparency and fully borne can those actions be considered ethical." In this, the popes are calling us to communion. In response to the new atheism, God is giving us the new evangelization, an act of charity that, in order to be an antidote to the individualism and isolation of our culture, can only be carried out in communion. The days of the Lone Ranger are over. No authoritarianism, no rivalries, no cultural imperialism, but reverence for the story of God's call to others, collaboration, obedience to the Spirit of God acting through the church, the body of Christ, and a selfless sharing of the faith values that undergird all the great civilizations. Fourth, we usually think of enculturation in terms of ethnicity. The media-generated culture in which we globally live crossed ethnic boundaries long ago. Its languages are being interpreted everywhere in the ethnic symbols in which they are expressed. How can evangelization be enculturated there? How can it build a culture of communication in the secular sphere? Through a theology and spirituality of communication. The post-conciliar document, Communio et Progressio, models such an approach in its review of salvation history and life in the church through the lens of communication, the faith response to God's self-revelation lived in communion. To enculturate and so share the principles and values that comprise the operating system of Western civilization, we will have to reboot. The process for this action is a communications paradigm. The church will always derive her theology and spirituality from revelation. However, in order to speak the truth in a comprehensible and life-giving way to people of this age, she needs to recover her early methodology, seeing revelation primarily as communication and not just content. In this paradigm for evangelization, the medium becomes the message. If the church neglects to do this, she will continue to see media as extraneous to her mission, and so will fail to both share the patrimony of the West and integrate it with the riches of the East and the South. In his evangelization encyclical, Mission of the Redeemer, John Paul II observes, "After preaching in a number of places, St. Paul arrived in Athens, where he went to the Areopagus, the cultural center of the learned. The first Areopagus of the modern age is the world of communications. Involvement in the mass media," he writes, "is not meant merely to strengthen the preaching of the gospel. It is not enough to use the media simply to spread the Christian message and the church's authentic teaching. It is also necessary to integrate that message into the new culture created by modern communications. The new culture originates not just from whatever content is eventually expressed, but from the very fact that there exist new ways of communicating, with new languages, new techniques, and a new psychology." End quote. Fifth, the new evangelization is joyful because it trusts in God. We all face obstacles in living and sharing our faith. Joy does not turn a blind eye to what afflicts society and the church, or fail to recognize our own insufficiency, but neither does it dwell on dour predictions about the future. Crossing the threshold of hope with the Apostle Paul, we see beneath every evil. Where sin increased, grace has abounded all the more. Romans. Pessimism repels, joy attracts. To quote Joan Rivers, the first time I see a jogger smiling, I'll consider it. In his first letter, John models the purpose and style of our own witness. We are writing these things so that you may fully share our joy. 1 John. Finally, the new evangelization is prayerful. If the Lord does not build a house, in vain do its builders labor. Psalm 127. As the story goes, when Father Alberione was approached by a journalist who wanted a photo of this entrepreneur of the gospel behind his desk, directing his empire, Father Alberione went over to his prie-dieu and knelt before the crucifix. Here, he directed, this is where you can take my picture. John Paul affirms that prayer constitutes the easiest way of making God and his redeeming love present in the world. As we discuss how to renew the West, how convincingly, how faithfully is prayer a factor? One day, as he concluded a parable on prayer, Christ asked a chilling question. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? John Paul describes this question as, quote, the source of the missionary dimension of the prayer of the church and of the Pope, end quote. A longing that Christ at his coming might find faith in the hearts, lives, and societies of the earth. Despite our insufficiency, we are here today to answer a resounding yes to that desire of Christ and of every believing Christian. Who compensates for our lack? Pope Francis answers, no words of encouragement will be enough unless the fire of the Holy Spirit burns in our hearts. May the Spirit spark a new Pentecost within us and among us, and in so doing, grant to the world a new season of faith. Thank you.
Okay, I want to make a brief announcement before we get to questions. Because of the nature of the microphone, I kindly ask you to come up here so Sister can hear your questions. That'll be all right. So whoever is brave enough, come forward row. Now, if you mention Jill Stonefather, we're all a little tired.
I'm Father Ron. You identified the new evangelization was oriented towards people who have, like, two groups of people, certain groups that have rejected Greco-Roman civilization, and then another group. Could you repeat that? And I was wondering what the source of that was. I've never heard that before.
Okay, let's see if I can find that really quick. I'll give you the exact quote again. Okay. The demographic is whole peoples who were once evangelized, but who have either rejected Christianity's Greco-Roman patrimony as outdated or outmoded and restrictive, or who have traded Christian culture for superficial consumerism. What I meant by that is that something like what Father Pavel mentioned, that for the first 2,000 years of Christianity, much of what we have experienced as faith has come through the Greco-Roman patrimony. And so whether we're talking about the United States, or we're talking about Latin America, or even parts of Asia, a lot of what characterized Christianity was what characterized that patrimony.
Sure.
It's not to say that that's the only way that Christianity needs to be enculturated. I hope I made that clear in what followed what I said, but that was certainly part of it.
Is that maybe Benedict XVI's contribution? Because it sounds more like him than John Paul.
I think I absorbed Benedict XVI through osmosis. Okay. I couldn't give you an exact citation for that.
Well, I think that's really insightful, because that's something I haven't quite heard, but I see philosophy as playing the role of especially demonstrating the Greco-Roman patrimony. So thank you, Sister.
You're welcome. Thanks, Father.
Anyone else like to come up and ask a question? No takers. Oh, wait, we have Peter Simpson, please. There will be no more selling of books at this time, Mike.
Sell sister's book. Sister, I'm going to pose a question to you, which I was also thinking of posing to Father Pavel. The very idea of culture. What do we actually mean by culture? The reason I raise the question is because we're told there are lots of cultures, and we have to enculturate, and we have to adapt to different cultural traditions. I'm not even sure whether that is a correct idea. I admit that nations have different practices and different habits of dress and different languages. I'm not quite sure whether there's such a thing as culture that's different, as opposed to an attempt by all of us to be fully human. Culture is just trying to be human. There's no such thing as one culture and another culture. They're just different attempts at the same culture. So my question would be, does the new evangelization have to be concerned about enculturation more than about just being human?
I mean, what does culture mean? I think that would be enough for a topic for a whole other conference, but because there's so many who have weighed in on that question. What I mentioned earlier about culture being ideas, ideals, stories, rituals, values, even economics, with regard to communications and the media culture, is very applicable, really, to any culture that we talk about. And so, if we can think of culture as something separate from ethnicity, or at least that includes ethnicity but goes beyond that, then I think that we won't get entrapped as easily in saying, well, how do we even talk about culture? I think that every human being, Father Paul mentioned this, every human being, human existence is mediated through culture. And so you can't be, there's not a disembodied human being. And so everything that is so material and so spiritual about who we are is expressed through culture. And so I think that, yes, if we speak about human beings, we have to, of necessity, speak about human beings in terms of culture. I'm looking for a quote here, and I think I may find it, if I can find it here. Hold on. Not that one. Okay. Oh, here we go. I think I'm finding it. Oh, man.
The while you're looking.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. While I'm looking, go ahead.
I wonder if it's correct to say that Greco-Roman culture is Greco-Roman. It's just an accident that it's Greco-Roman. So to talk about Greco-Roman culture and to say that, you know, the church was caught up in that, but the new evangelization requires us to be aware of other cultural, other human systems and practices and cultures. is to buy into a false paradigm that rationality or reason is different according to the time or place where it is. Rationality or reason is always the same everywhere. It just so happened that for us, the Greco-Romans did a great deal more to explore it and develop it than other peoples, but that's purely accidental. It could have been Chinese. It could have been Indian. What does it matter? It's human culture.
It could have been, but it wasn't. And so to take it from, just as the whole notion of democracy and a republic, at least in the modern sense, happened to have taken place on US soil the way it did, it doesn't mean it's simply American. It could have taken place anywhere, but this happens to be where it historically evolved the way it did. And so I wouldn't want to say, imply that when I say the Greco-Roman patrimony, unless you as a Korean adopt the totality of the world view of the Greco-Roman world, then you're not being Christian. That's simply false. That's not what the church is teaching, for sure. And I think also that things are true, that they're true because they're Christian, or Christian because they're true. And I think that, as Father Paulo answered, that it was that part. You're right. It's found wherever it's found. That's why the church can say there are elements of truth and goodness and beauty everywhere in every religion. It just so happens that that Christianity embraces all of that. It's this. Why? Because truth is what the whole truth about Christ, about God, about the human person is what Christianity is about. And so, yes, we have to integrate the West with the East and the South. I think of one of our sisters in the Philippines, who referred to Christ the Master. I think I mentioned this last year in my talk, if you get a chance to read that the Master, not in the sense of Lord, but in the sense of teacher, and she made the very cultural connection with the Guru and his disciple, the Master and his disciple. So that's enculturating something that is very much a part of both the Eastern and Western civilizations. It's equally true, regardless of who came up with it first.
Excuse me, Peter. That's an interesting question.
You're gonna have to stand up. I won't be able to hear you. Yeah.
Hello, sister, this is Marvin.
Hi, good to see you again.
Yes, I'd like to get into this conversation with Professor Peter Simpson. Peter, don't you think that there's something distinctive about the Greco-Roman culture, which where Christianity arose, and as a result, was somewhat responsible for the advances of science and economics?
Yes.
So, but there'd have to be something distinctive. This is well known that, in Western Europe, these things happened.
Yes.
Okay, so then, okay, so then there is a difference. Then there is a difference within cultures. You're saying that all cultures, why have a difference? Why highlight a difference in all cultures? We're just trying to be human. But what about cultures being responsible for improving the human conditions overall?
I suppose what I'm trying to suggest is that to accept the language of different cultures is already a mistake, because it's to buy into a system of thought which makes human thinking subject to time and place, which it isn't. Human thought is essentially universal, and human discovery and human development belongs to mankind as such, regardless of time or place. So you can talk about culture in the sense of the development of the human soul, but it's a mistake to talk about Greco-Roman culture, Chinese culture, Korean culture, other than in a derivative sense. There's only one culture, and it's transcendent the time and place.
Okay. I believe that now with the technology that we have, that the culture is in some sense emerging. So I understand your position. I understand your position that there's one human culture, especially with this day and age. But we're talking about the new evangelization effort, which came from a distinctive culture, which you agree that it was, the Greco-Roman culture. So in order to re-evangelize or to participate in for a re-evangelization, even though now that I do agree, because of the technology, cultures seem to merge. We can talk to people. Where are you located, sister? In Boston?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we have to. I think we have to recognize and go back to what made Christianity strong. Am I making myself clear?
Well,
Yeah.
you're talking about first principles. They're going back to the roots.
Yes, and it was spawned from this Greco-Roman culture, even though we live in a completely different society today. Perhaps it may be even easier, but I think we should go grasp what originally made Christianity strong. This is about re-evangelization, correct? So
I would like to just throw an idea out there, perhaps a resolution to this dilemma. If we look at Jesus Christ, we see somebody who was born and who lived and died and rose again within a particular culture, ethnically speaking. And yet, none of us, I don't think, would ever deny that he has a universal life, a universal application, that it can't be understood and lived within every ethnicity. And so I don't believe that enculturation and universality are mutually exclusive. The challenge to us is to take what is best and to bring it together. And I think that there's value, there is value to every culture and to every civilization. The West has its own, and there's an incredibly rich patrimony. And we have a responsibility to share that, but also have a responsibility to integrate that with others. And if we want to live on this planet in some kind of peace, the feeling that we're going to be able to do it. And I think Christ gives us that, because just in who he is and how he grew up.
No? Sister, it's Bill McVeigh.
I'm here.
I'm wondering, let me approach the culture in a different way. Wasn't the Greeks that said, if I look into the heavens first, then I can understand the city? Something like Anthrax. Well, I would far rather look at cultures or different people living in different places, because that's kind of a professor or an academic cultures, anthropologists use it. So I would say different people in different parts of the world. I'm more interested in how they worship, how they pray to God, how they touch the divine, how they feel for it. Another thing is, you and I have talked about AA. Right now, today, and anywhere in the world, probably by 5 o'clock tonight or 12 o'clock tomorrow, there'll be thousands of people all through the world sitting down at a 12-step meeting, discussing spirituality. China, Italy, New Jersey, Kansas City, Poland, and I made an argument here, the first day of the conference, that that's okay. Because there's an awful lot of Thomas in there. There's an awful lot of principles. That this stuff, if we look at how people feel and pray, and as Father Pauly was saying, care for one another as persons in a civilization of love, the best of the cultures will automatically blend together. But to go and try and enforce a set system of epistemology or whatever on people, or way of thinking, it ain't gonna work. The heart will lead you to truth. Charles Sanders verse is evolution of love. Thank you.
Archbishop, the name just escapes me. President of Pontifical Council on Communication, Philadelphia. Oh my goodness. I'm forgetting my superior. Anyway, he says that, and he says culture in itself is, sorry?
Is it Chapeau?
No, not Dolan. Dolan? Not Dolan. I can't remember. Oh, that's terrible. Anyway, he says, a culture is the specifically human way to approach evermore being. And if, on the other hand, in faith, man opens himself to knowledge of the supreme being in whose image and likeness he was created, there is no one who does not see what a profound relationship there is between one and the other human experience. One understands then why the Second Vatican Council wanted to emphasize the outstanding incentives and encouragements which the mystery of Christian faith offers to man, that he may fulfill with greater commitment the task of building up a more human world, that is, one corresponding to his total vocation. That's what Gaudium says. And he continues, and further, culture in itself is communication. Communication not only and not so much of man with the environment that he is called to dominate, as of man with other men. Indeed, culture is a relational and social dimension of human existence. Enlightened by faith, it expresses also man's full communication with God in Christ, and upon contact with the truths revealed by God, more easily finds the foundation of the human truths which foster the common good. You could be Vietnamese, you could be Nigerian, you could be Canadian, and still be able to understand what that means within your own ethnic context. And so if culture is what makes us human, what makes us, or I should say, it's the way we express being human, then why wouldn't faith be able to be integrated with this? And what is our job as in the new evangelization, but to make communication that the basis of that culture that reaches beyond ethnic boundaries, as it has already done.
Hi, sister, this is Fulvio Di Blasi.
Hello.
Hi, this is Fulvio Di Blasi. I want to follow up on Peter's suggestion. I found, I think I understand what he means, but I find it a little ambiguous in terminology, because I think that when you talk about a common culture of human beings, it looks like you are trespassing from culture to nature, creating an ambiguity in what is actually, in a sense, the opposite side. I mean, nature is what makes us all human, but then as humans, we live necessarily in the realm of freedom, so we express ourselves in a very peculiar way. We cannot, in a sense, we are slaves of speaking from the viewpoint of a specific expression over freedom. So culture is always different, and it can express better or worse human nature. But in a sense, every country, every place in which we grow up together as a community, we would call our common freedom a culture. And then the point is this culture expressing, as she said, well enough our nature? But when you talk about culture as what makes us all human the same way, okay, that's my way of talking about nature, not of talking about culture. It's just a terminological clarification. I think other than that, we probably are on the same page.
Thank you. Archbishop Foley, that's the name of, he retired now as president of the Pontifical Council of Social Communication, but that's where this quote comes from.
When do you want me to end the session? Sister, just to change the subject, I heard you mention that we really were emphatic about us engaging in media. Well, I got on Facebook in 2007, and I found that I just didn't like it. It ruined. It took a lot of time away from me, and I found it degrading. And I advocate for a lot of young people to not use media, and it's actually part of my evangelization is to pull people off the edge, because it's such a terrible waste of time, or it can be. It tends to. So I wonder if part of evangelization can actually be getting people off of media and to have real friendships and real relationships.
Or if you're going to use media, if you're going to engage with each other in media, don't let that be the exclusive way that you engage with people, because that's the key. When we have, with our postulants and our novices, part of the formation program, and this is where I think the Pauline family is breaking some ground for formation of religious, it is precisely how to engage and with people, not only using media, how to enter into the media culture and how to go about that as a Christian, as a religious, as a Pauline. And so what does it mean to be a Christian, a religious, and a Pauline? It means to be able to fulfill other commitments that we have. It means also to live a disciplined life. It means to live a life of love. If our engagement with media takes us away from that, then we need to examine that and set ourselves back on the right track. To simply pull away from media is not a solution, I don't think. We don't seem to think, simply because the media are with us and our culture is generated by media. If we want to evangelize, it will have to be within that culture. And so we need to go through that process, be formed as responsible human beings, responsible Christians. And how do we do that? It takes discernment. And I think rather than teaching people to pull away from media, we need to teach people how to discern. And I think St. Ignatius's rules for discernment would certainly be a great way of doing that. We use them ourselves for that.
Well, I think you might be more disciplined than I am.
But you know what, I have to tell you, it's not that I've ever, I have a confession to make, and I'll make it a public confession. There were a couple of things. One on Facebook, on social media, one of the pitfalls is how the ego can get involved in that just by looking to see how many people are liking what I have posted, or how many people are responding or commenting on what I have posted. And oh my gosh, what's the matter with me? What I'm posting, only 55 people say they like it, and this other sister, my gosh, she consistently gets 150 people. What's wrong with me? And so those are the kinds of things, those are the temptations, those are the pitfalls. And I'm like everybody else. I have to constantly be examining myself. And I can tell you very often, much of my examine of conscience is involved with aspects of media. Not only how do I use it, but what is it doing to me? How is it helping me or hindering me from hearing the call of God in my own life? And that's what we need to ask ourselves. That's part of spirituality of communication.
Well, sister, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but we want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll see you a little bit later.
Okay. I think she's part of the introduction to the sister, so I don't know.
Wait, there's a break on the,
Yeah, there's a couple of minute break.
okay, right.
We should.
Sure, let me call you on my phone, okay?
Okay, give me a second, I have the cell phone reception where I am is really bad.
You know what, let me just do it respect. I have to go, but you can call this video like I asked. Yeah. Okay, great.
I actually have to leave, but Sebastian's here, and he's gonna handle the rest of the,
Terrific, okay. And is Dr. Redmond still available?
Yes, he's right here. Sure, he's about to come to the camera.
Okay, thank you.
And he's almost there.
Hello, sister, how are you?
Okay, I want, you know how you mentioned something, hi Sebastian. You mentioned something about a free will offering, taking up a free will offering. Would you do the kindness of mentioning that someone who doesn't seek out to your venue, and I would feel more comfortable doing that?